I thought it was just the whiskey talking until I saw his eyes flick toward his phone as if he were grading a performance. I did not cry. I simply smiled because I had just discovered the one thing he forgot to hide. That night, the entire room laughed in my face, completely unaware that they were actually laughing at their own financial funerals. My name is Harper Calloway, and at 34 years old, I manage operations for Blue Canyon Integrations in Pittsburgh, so I know the difference between a spontaneous disaster and a planned demolition. I stood in the center of Derek and Tessa's living room holding a lukewarm bottle of beer and watching the people I called my friends turn into hyenas. The air was thick with the smell of buffalo sauce and performative masculinity. It was supposed to be a playoff watch party, but the game on the 70-inch screen was just background noise. The real sport tonight was the passive-aggressive dismantling of spouses for comedic effect. I watched Grant Calloway across the room. My husband was 36 years old and a sales manager for a medical device company, which meant he knew exactly how to mirror body language to make people feel safe. He was leaning back on the sectional sofa with his arm draped over the cushion and laughing at a joke Derek had made about marriage being a life sentence without parole. The room felt tight. It was the kind of claustrophobia that comes from too many people trying too hard to prove they are having a good time. I walked over to him. It was an instinct born of 7 years of marriage and the simple desire to be near the person who was supposed to be my partner. I reached out. My hand drifted toward his shoulder, intending to offer a gentle squeeze. The moment my fingers grazed the cotton of his polo shirt, he flinched. It was not a subtle pull away. It was a violent recoil, as if I were made of burning coal. Grant scrambled up from the sofa so fast he nearly knocked over his drink. He stood there panting slightly and adjusted his shirt as he looked around the room to ensure he had everyone's attention. "Nothing you do will make me feel intimate with you." The words hung in the air like a slap. He had projected his voice to the back of the room. It did not sound like a genuine outburst of frustration. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded like a line delivered by an actor who had practiced in front of a mirror to get the inflection just right. The silence lasted for exactly 2 seconds before the explosion. Derek slapped his thigh so hard the sound cracked through the room. "Oh, man," Derek gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. Tessa covered her mouth with both hands, but her eyes were crinkling with glee. Then I saw the red light. Nolan was sitting in the armchair, and he had his phone raised with the lens pointed directly at my face to capture the humiliation in high definition. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for the scream, or the tears, or the scene that would make this the highlight of their group chat for the next 6 months. I felt my blood temperature drop. My operations brain took over immediately. Assess the damage. Mitigate the risk. Do not give them the reaction they purchased. I looked Grant in the eye. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were darting toward Nolan's phone. Okay. I turned on my heel and walked into the kitchen. The linoleum felt cool under my feet. I walked to the sink and turned on the faucet. I pumped the soap and washed my hands for 20 seconds, scrubbing the feeling of his shirt off my fingertips. I focused on the water swirling down the drain. This was a reset. This was me washing away the wife who thought she was at a party and waking up the woman who realized she was in a war zone. Grant's phone was sitting on the granite island next to the untouched vegetable platter. He had left it there when he went to get a refill. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a group chat titled Exit Playbook. The preview text was clear enough to stop my heart. "Did you say the line, 'We've got money on it'?" I stared at the glowing letters. The cold water was still running over my hands. This was not a marital argument. This was not a drunk husband venting to his buddies. This was a script. I was not a person to them anymore. I was content. I was a prop in a performance designed to entertain the very people I had cooked dinner for last week. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands on a paper towel. I reached over and tapped the light switch, plunging the kitchen into darkness. Through the open doorway, I could see the living room bathed in the blue light of the television. Grant was sitting back down, accepting a high five from Derek. He looked triumphant. I stood in the dark and watched them. A smile slowly spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of an engineer who had just identified the fatal flaw in a complex machine. They thought they were the audience. They had no idea they had just handed me the blueprints to their own destruction. Standing there, I let the memory of our beginning wash over me, not with nostalgia, but with the cold light of an autopsy. We met 7 years ago at a library fundraiser. Grant had been charming in a way that felt bespoke. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like the only person in the room. He remembered the name of my childhood pet and my preferred coffee order after hearing them once. I realize now he was not listening to understand me. He was data mining. He was collecting the access codes to my trust. We bought a townhouse in a quiet suburb of Pittsburgh that looked exactly like the life I thought I wanted. It had a brick facade and a manicured lawn and neighbors who waved but never asked questions. Our friends told us we were lucky. You two are so in sync, they would say over glasses of Pinot Noir. We looked like a brochure for domestic bliss. But brochures are marketing materials designed to sell you something you do not need and usually cannot afford. The shift did not happen overnight. It happened in the margins. Because I was organized, I took on the invisible load. I managed the social calendar. I bought the birthday gifts for his mother. I paid the utility bills and tracked the expiration dates on our insurance policies. I became the infrastructure that allowed him to be the carefree husband. Slowly, the language of our marriage changed. The affection evaporated and was replaced by transaction. I love you became thanks for handling the car registration. He stopped seeing me as his partner and started seeing me as a service provider. When I executed my duties perfectly, I was rewarded with a nod. When I faltered, I was met with silence. When I finally tried to talk to him about the distance growing between us, he did not get angry. He got calm. It was that terrifying medical sales calm he used to negotiate contracts. "Harper, you are being so sensitive," he would say with a sigh that suggested he was exhausted by my very existence. "Why do you always have to create drama?" "You are getting clingy." Those words were weapons. He used them to carve away my confidence until I started to check my own pulse to see if I was the one going crazy. The group did not help. If I tried to mention that Grant was distant, Tessa would wave her hand and say, "Oh, don't be a vibe killer, Harper. Just have a drink." They wanted the party. They did not want the hangover of my reality. Then came the privacy screens. Grant changed his passcode 6 months ago. He started taking his phone into the bathroom for showers that lasted 20 minutes. I would see him on the couch typing furiously with a small private smile playing on his lips. It was a look of intimacy I had not received in 2 years. When I walked into the room, he would lock the screen and the smile would vanish like a light switch being flipped off. I tried everything to fix it. I booked weekend getaways that he spent on his laptop. I scheduled date nights that ended in silence. I suggested marriage counseling, and to my surprise, he agreed. But now I realized he did not go to save the marriage. He went to document my reactions. He would sit in the therapist's office and say, "See, this is what I deal with at home." He was building a case file. He was using the sessions to have a licensed professional witness my alleged instability. Standing there in the dark with the hum of the refrigerator behind me, a memory surfaced from our second date. We were discussing relationships, and Grant had said something that I had dismissed as a dark joke at the time. Marriage is a long-term contract. He had said, swirling his wine. The one who cares less has power. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had spent 7 years caring too much. Grant had spent 7 years positioning himself to win. He was playing a game of power, and I had just realized that I was the opponent. I realized that Grant had been busy constructing a phantom version of me. To our friends, I was no longer Harper, the woman who organized the surprise parties and remembered their children's allergies. I was Harper the fun police. Grant played the role of the long-suffering husband brilliantly. He was the martyr trapped in a cage of my making, and they were the sympathetic audience watching him rattle the bars. It became a ritual at every gathering. Grant would wait for a lull in the conversation and then drop a comment. It started small. I would love to go on that trip, but I have to run everything by headquarters first. He would jerk his thumb at me and pause. It was a timing beat. He was waiting for the chuckle. When he got it, he would ramp it up. The comments got sharper and the humiliation became more specific. He was beta testing his material to see how much cruelty he could disguise as banter. One evening, I tried to correct him when he told a story about me throwing out his favorite shirt, a shirt he had actually spilled bleach on and asked me to discard. "That is not what happened," I said, keeping my voice level. Tessa cut me off before I could finish the sentence. She waved her wine glass at me and rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Harper. Stop being so serious. It is a joke. You really need to learn to take a joke." That was the moment I understood the casting. I was the villain in a sitcom I never auditioned for. Grant was the lovable protagonist just trying to have a beer, and I was the shrew destroying the vibe. The script was so well established that any attempt to defend myself just reinforced the character profile he had built. The confirmation came from Nolan. We were standing by the cooler, and he looked at me with a pity that felt slimy. "Look, Harper," he said, lowering his voice. "We all know about the situation. We know Grant puts up with a lot. The situation." It sounded like a chronic disease. Grant was not a husband failing his wife. He was a saint enduring a burden. At home, the manipulation was even more sophisticated. Grant had learned a few buzzwords from the counseling sessions and weaponized them. Boundaries was his favorite. If I asked why he came home at 2 a.m, it was a violation of his boundaries. If I expressed sadness that he missed my birthday, I was not respecting his emotional space. But his boundaries were a one-way street. He could demand dinner and sex and clean laundry, but I was not allowed to ask for a conversation. I was not allowed to need. I stopped crying on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my car in the driveway after another dinner where I had served as the punchline. I pulled out my phone. I did not text him. I did not call my mother. I opened a new note file and typed a single word at the top, documentation. I switched modes. I was no longer a heartbroken wife. I was an operations lead looking at a failing project. When a project fails at Blue Canyon, we do not cry about it. We audit the failure. We secure the data. We draft an exit strategy. I typed in the date and the exact time. I wrote down the joke he made about my salary. I wrote down the amount of money he claimed he spent on dinner versus what the credit card notification on his phone had flashed. As I scrolled back through my mental log of the last few months, I noticed something chilling. The jokes from Derek and Nolan and the dismissals from Tessa were not random. They were synchronized. When Grant made a comment about my spending, Derek would immediately chime in with a story about his ex-wife's shopping habits. It was too smooth. It was too rhythmically perfect. They were not just laughing along. They were following cues. Someone was directing this scene, and I had been the only one on stage without a script. Grant slept with the heavy, unbothered rhythm of a man who believed he had already won. I sat at the kitchen island with only the under-cabinet lighting casting a glow on the stainless steel appliances. My laptop was open. I logged into our primary joint checking account and felt my heart rate slow down into a steady mechanical beat. It was time for the audit. I filtered the transaction history for the last 8 months. The numbers sprawled across the screen like a map of betrayal. I saw repeated cash withdrawals at ATMs I had never visited. $400 on a Friday, $600 on a Tuesday. Then came the charges for the boutique hotels in downtown Pittsburgh, the Fairmont, the Hotel Monaco. There were charges for jewelry stores and high-end lingerie brands that I had never worn in my life. I scrolled deeper and found a credit card linked to the account that I did not recognize. It was listed under an authorized user named Household Support. It was a brilliant piece of labeling. It looked like a generic budget category for cleaning services or landscaping, but when I expanded the details, the merchant codes told a different story. It was all restaurants and ride shares and late-night delivery services. I opened a new tab and pulled my annual credit report. I answered the security questions with trembling fingers. When the file loaded, I saw it immediately. There was a Chase Visa card opened in my name that I had never touched. The outstanding balance was $18,700. I stared at the number. The billing address was not our home. It was a post office box in Monroeville. I picked up my phone and dialed the automated banking line. I entered the account number from the screen. The robotic voice confirmed the balance and the opening date. The card had been active for 13 months. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, but I swallowed it down. 13 months ago, we were booking our anniversary trip. 13 months ago, I was nursing him through the flu. He had not just stumbled into an affair, he had built a financial infrastructure for it while I was making him soup. I went back to the statement details for that card. It was not just gifts and hotels. I saw a recurring payment to Duquesne Light. I saw a monthly charge for Xfinity Internet. I saw weekly grocery runs at a Whole Foods in the East End. Grant was not just sleeping with someone else. He was funding a fully operational parallel life using my credit score to keep the lights on. I stopped looking at the numbers as tragedy and started treating them as evidence. I took screenshots of every page. I downloaded the PDF statements for the last year. I printed physical copies of the most damning transactions, and then I emailed the entire digital packet to a secure Proton Mail account I had created 5 minutes ago. I deleted the sent history and cleared the browser cache. Just as I closed the laptop, Grant's phone buzzed on the counter where he had left it charging. The screen lit up with a message from the Exit Playbook group. Exact phrasing. Write, don't improvise. I stared at the text. My hands stopped shaking. The outburst at the party had not been a loss of control. It was a deliverable. He had a quota to meet and a script to follow. I looked at his laptop bag sitting by the door. Grant was arrogant. He assumed I was too emotional to look and too stupid to understand what I saw. I walked over and opened his laptop. He had not even password protected it because he thought he owned me. I opened his recent documents. There was a file saved to the desktop named simply Project Alpha. I double-clicked it. It was not a work presentation. It was a Word document. At the top in bold letters it read, Timeline. Below that were headers that made my blood run cold. Phase 1, Isolation and Discredit Social Circle. Phase 2, Provocation and Documentation of Instability. Phase 3, Asset Separation and Filing. I read the bullet points under Phase 2. Public outburst at party was checked off. Next on the list was Wellness check called by concerned friends. I closed the document and gently shut the laptop. I walked back to the kitchen and looked at the dark hallway leading to our bedroom. I was sleeping next to an architect who had drawn up the blueprints for my ruin over a year ago. He thought he was on Phase 2. He had no idea I had just initiated a phase he never wrote down. I sat across from Miranda Voss in an office that smelled of lemon polish and expensive retainer fees. Miranda was 62 years old, and she did not keep tissues on her desk because she did not deal in sympathy. She dealt in leverage. She adjusted her glasses and looked at the stack of printouts I had placed on the mahogany surface. Her voice was dry and sharp like the sound of paper tearing. "Do not leave the house," Miranda said without looking up from the bank statements. "If you leave the marital residence, you abandon your position. Do not confront him. Do not scream. Information is ammunition. Harper, you do not fire your weapon into the air just to make noise. You wait until you have a clear shot." I nodded. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. This was not emotional triage anymore. This was a tactical operation. "I understand," I said. "What is the first move?" Miranda handed me a list. "Protect the assets you can access. Secure your communications. And find the deed to the townhouse." I left her office and went to work. I drove to a bank across town where Grant had no accounts and opened a checking account in my name only. I transferred exactly half of the liquid funds from our joint savings. Miranda had assured me that taking 50% was legally defensible prior to filing a divorce petition, but taking a penny more would look like dissipation of assets. I moved $7,500 and left the rest. Next, I initiated a credit freeze with all 3 bureaus. I sat in my car in the parking lot and typed in the request on my phone, blocking any new inquiries. I changed every password I owned from email to social media using a random generator string that Grant would never guess. Then I drove to a discount electronics store and bought a cheap burner phone with cash. I hid it inside the lining of my winter coat hanging in the back of the closet. When I got home, Grant was at work. I went straight to the filing cabinet in the study. I needed the deed to the townhouse. I found it buried under 3 years of tax returns. I read the language carefully. The house was not titled to Grant and Harper Calloway. It was titled to the Calloway Family Trust, established by my grandfather long before I met Grant. I took a picture of the document and sent it to Miranda. Her reply came 3 minutes later. He has no claim to the principal asset unless he can prove commingling of funds or active appreciation due to his financial contribution. This is your fortress. Then I remembered something that made my stomach turn. 6 months ago, on a Tuesday night, Grant had come home with a bottle of wine and a stack of papers. He had told me rates were dropping and we needed to refinance immediately to save money. He had been urgent and pushy, trying to get me to sign right there on the kitchen island while I was exhausted from a 12-hour shift. I had refused because I wanted to read the fine print first, and he had stormed off calling me controlling. I called Miranda on the burner phone. "Miranda, he tried to get me to sign a refinance agreement 6 months ago." I said, my voice trembling slightly. "He said it was for a lower rate." "He was lying," Miranda said, and her voice was cold as ice. "A refinance would have required retitling the property out of the trust and into your joint names to secure the mortgage. He wasn't trying to save money on interest. He was trying to legally steal half your house." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. The man I married had not just fallen out of love with me. He had been actively trying to liquidate my inheritance. Miranda sent over the draft for the next step. It was a request for discovery, including full forensic accounting. We were going to ask for everything: expense reports, reimbursements, travel logs. We were going to file a motion to preserve evidence, which meant if Grant deleted one email or shredded one receipt after being served, he would be in contempt of court. I heard the garage door open. Grant was home. I put the files away. I went to the kitchen and started chopping vegetables for dinner. My hands were steady. I established a new rule for myself in that moment. I would not cry. I would not argue. I would let him believe he was still the director of the show. Grant walked into the kitchen and tossed his keys on the counter. He looked at me, expecting the broken woman from the party. "What's for dinner?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "Stir fry," I said. I did not smile, but I did not frown. I just kept chopping, let him think he won. He had no idea the war had already started, and he was standing on a landmine. The burner phone vibrated against the plywood shelf of my closet at exactly midnight. I was awake because sleep is a luxury for people who are not dismantling their lives. It was a text from a number I had entered earlier that day. Brielle. She was Nolan's wife and the woman who had poured me wine while her husband filmed my humiliation. "I can't sleep. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen. Before I could reply, a flood of images began to load. They were screenshots, dozens of them. It was the scrolling history of the Exit Playbook group chat going back 9 months. I watched my life being dissected by the people I spent holidays with. There were photos of me asleep on the sofa with my mouth slightly open, captioned with vomiting emojis. There was a betting pool on when I would crack, but the most chilling part was the script writing. I found the entry from 2 weeks ago. Grant had typed, "I need a line that shuts her down, but makes me look like the victim." Nolan had suggested, "Tell her she's suffocating you." Grant replied, "No, needs to be colder. How about nothing you do will make me feel intimate with you?" And then, Derek Brutal. I love it. I will laugh first if it gets awkward to cue the room. I felt a cold sweat break across the back of my neck. It was not just cruelty, it was a production. I did not type back a paragraph of rage. I typed a single word. "Thanks." Then I asked the only question that mattered for the war I was fighting. Did he ever talk about money? The 3 dots of her typing indicator bounced for a long time. It was the hesitation of a woman knowing she was about to light a fuse she could not put out. Yeah. He brags about his slush fund. He puts personal dinners and hotels on the company card. He lists it as client entertainment. Says the company never checks anything under $500. I set the phone down on the bed. The air in the room seemed to shift. This was no longer just a messy divorce. Grant worked in medical device sales. It was a highly regulated industry governed by the Sunshine Act and strict compliance laws. Falsifying expense reports to hide an affair was not just a fireable offense. It was a career death sentence that could trigger federal audits. I remembered Miranda's voice in my head. We do not blackmail Harper. Extortion is a crime. We do not threaten to call his boss. We simply include a request for all expense reports and client verification logs in the discovery motion. We just turn on the lights and let the cockroaches scatter. The phone buzzed again. Brielle was not finished. You need to be careful. He is building a narrative. He told everyone you are having manic episodes. He is talking about calling in a wellness check if you act erratic again. He wants a police report on file saying you are unstable. My blood ran cold. A wellness check. He wanted uniformed officers pounding on our door so he could stand there with a sad face and tell them his wife was having a mental break. It was the ultimate gaslight. I picked up the phone and deleted the thread locally, but the images were already backed up to my secure cloud. I had the map of the conspiracy. I made a new pact with myself in the silence of the guest room. I would never be alone with him again without a digital witness. Every conversation would be logged. Every interaction would be time-stamped. He wanted to paint me as the crazy wife who lost control. Instead, he was going to meet the cold precision of a woman who kept receipts. If he wanted a wellness check, I would give him a forensic audit. Grant came home on Friday with a bouquet of supermarket carnations that still had the $9 price sticker stuck to the plastic wrap. He offered a half-hearted apology that sounded more like a negotiation tactic than an expression of remorse. He tried to pull me into a hug, and his hands lingered on my waist for a second too long. It was a calculated move. He was hitting the reset button on his public image. If I rejected him now, I would be the cold, unforgiving wife he had described to everyone. Let's go to Derek and Tessa's tonight, he said, pulling back and giving me a boyish smile that used to work on me. Just a quiet dinner. We can clear the air? I want everyone to see that we are good. You just need to loosen up a bit. Take a joke. Okay, I looked at him. He was asking me to walk back into the arena where he had humiliated me, but this time he wanted me to smile while the Lions ate. Okay, I said, keeping my voice even. But I have conditions. We keep the alcohol to a minimum. I want us to talk like adults. No scenes. Sure, babe. He laughed, waving his hand dismissively. Whatever you want. He did not understand that I was not asking for a pleasant evening. I was ensuring that the witnesses to his destruction would be sober enough to testify. I went upstairs to get ready. I did not dress for a dinner party. I dressed for a tribunal. I chose a black dress with a high neckline and long sleeves. It was severe and structured like armor. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun at the base of my neck, securing every strand with pins. I applied minimal makeup. I did not want to look fragile. I did not want to look like I had been crying. I wanted to look like the person who signs the checks. I opened my large leather tote bag. Inside, I placed 3 distinct folders. The first contained the screenshots of the Exit Playbook group chat printed in high-resolution color, so everyone could see their own names next to their cruelty. The second folder held the bank statements for the secret credit card with every fraudulent charge circled in thick red ink. The third folder was the legal packet Miranda had overnighted to me. It contained the motion for discovery and the preservation of assets order. I paused and thought about the volatility of the group. If things got physical, I needed redundancy. I walked out to my car and placed 5 backup copies of the evidence packet in the trunk under the spare tire. I also uploaded every file to a cloud drive that automatically shared a link to Miranda's inbox if I did not log in for 24 hours. The drive to Derek and Tessa's house was quiet. Grant drove with one hand on the wheel, humming along to the radio. He seemed relaxed. He thought he had managed the asset. As we turned onto their street, he reached over and patted my knee. "See?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are calming down. You just need to stop being so crazy." "Good girl." I stared out the window at the passing streetlights. "Good girl." It was the way you spoke to a dog that had finally stopped barking at the mailman. He did not see a wife. He saw a piece of property that he had successfully broken. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the burner phone. I sent a text to Miranda consisting of 8 words. Tonight he'll try to perform. I'll let him. We pulled into the driveway. The house was lit up. I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. I took a deep breath and gripped the handle of my bag. When we walked through the front door, the atmosphere was electric. Derek and Tessa were standing in the foyer holding drinks. Nolan and Brielle were on the couch. I noticed immediately that phones were already in hands or resting face up on the coffee table. They were not looking at me with friendship. They were looking at me with anticipation. They were waiting for the season finale of the drama Grant had promised them, and they had front row seats. The dinner began with the clinking of silverware against china and the smell of roasted chicken that Tessa had likely bought pre-made and plated to look homemade. Grant stood up at the head of the table holding his wine glass aloft like a king addressing his court. He looked handsome in the candlelight, which made the betrayal feel even more grotesque. "I want to make a toast," Grant said, flashing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "To resilience and to boundaries. Marriage is hard work, but I think we are finally turning a corner, to second chances." He looked down at me expecting gratitude. I raised my glass but did not drink. I just watched the liquid tremble slightly in the crystal. Derek leaned back in his chair and let out a bark of laughter. "Man, that line from last week, though, 'Nothing you do will make me feel intimate with you,' that was legendary." I almost choked on my beer. The table erupted in giggles. Tessa covered her mouth. Nolan shook his head with a smirk. They were looking at me, waiting for me to chuckle to validate the abuse and to sign the social contract that said my humiliation was just good fun. I placed my hand firmly on the stem of my water glass. The sound of my palm hitting the table was soft but final. No. The laughter died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. "We are not laughing about that," I said. My voice was low and steady. I reached into my bag and pulled out the first folder. I did not throw it. I slid the top sheet across the tablecloth toward Tessa. Then I slid the second sheet to Derek. It was the screenshot of the group chat printed in high-definition color. Their own profile pictures smiled back at them next to the text where they had workshopped Grant's cruelty. "Read the timestamp," I said, pointing to the paper in front of Derek. "You scripted the line 2 days before the party, and Derek, you volunteered to provide the laugh track." Derek looked down at the paper and his face drained of color. Grant realized what was happening. He lurched up from his chair, knocking his wine glass over. Red wine stained the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. "Give me that," Grant yelled, reaching across the table to snatch the paper from Tessa. I did not move. I did not flinch. "Sit down, Grant," I said. "I have already backed this up and sent copies to every spouse represented in this room, including the ones not present tonight." Grant froze. His hand hovered in mid-air. The threat of total social exposure paralyzed him. I reached into the bag again. This time I pulled out the financial statements. I laid them out on the table one by one like tarot cards revealing a dark future. The Fairmont Hotel, $400 a night, 3 weekends in a row. I read the charges aloud. Tiffany and Company, $2,000. I never received a necklace grant. I pulled out the credit report. "And this," I said, smoothing the paper flat. "A Chase Visa opened in my name without my consent. Currently carrying a balance of $18,700. The billing address is a post office box in Monroeville." "You are crazy," Grant stammered, but his voice was thin. "You are stalking me. This is—" "I am not stalking you," I interrupted him, locking my eyes onto his. "I am auditing you. Explain the card in my name." He looked around the table for support, but nobody was meeting his eyes. Tessa was reading the bank statement with her mouth slightly open. It was just financial planning. Grant tried to pivot, sweating now. I was managing our assets. No, I said. You were stealing them. I pulled out the final piece of paper. It was the refinance agreement he had tried to force me to sign 6 months ago. You told me this was to get a lower interest rate, I said, addressing the table but keeping my focus on him. But my lawyer looked at the deed. This house is in a family trust. The only way to refinance was to retitle the property into our joint names. You were not trying to lower the rate. You were trying to take the house out of the trust so you could cash out 50% of the equity when you filed for divorce. I looked at Derek. He tried to trick me into giving him half of my grandfather's house, I said calmly. Derek looked up from the papers. He looked at Grant, and for the first time in years, I saw disgust in his eyes. The bro code had a limit, and stealing a family home apparently crossed it. The silence that filled the room was heavy and suffocating. It was no longer the awkward silence of a bad joke. It was the silence of a jury that had just heard the final piece of evidence. Grant stood there with wine dripping onto the floor, and he looked small. He looked like a man who had brought a script to a gunfight. Grant looked at the papers scattered across the table, and then he looked at me. I could see the gears turning in his head as he scrambled to find the right page in his mental script. He decided to double down on phase 2. "You are paranoid," Grant yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Do you see this? She is tracking my every move. She is completely unstable. This is a violation of my privacy. I should call the police right now for a wellness check because you are clearly having a breakdown." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply smoothed the tablecloth in front of me. This was premeditated. I said, looking at him like he was a specimen in a jar. You rehearsed. You coordinated. And you documented your own conspiracy. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It hit the table with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel. "This is a petition for divorce," I said. "Inside, you will also find a formal request for discovery and a motion to preserve all financial assets and digital evidence effective immediately." Grant reached for the envelope, but I placed my hand on top of it. "From now on, you speak to my attorney," I said. "If you text me, I will forward it to her. If you call me, I will not answer. If you try to approach me without a witness, I will file for an emergency restraining order." "You can't do this!" Grant hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. "I will bury you in legal fees. Miranda Voss has already drafted a litigation hold letter." I interrupted him. "It will be on the desk of the legal department at your company by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. It requires them to preserve all records related to your corporate credit card and expense reimbursements." I paused to let that sink in. "And Grant?" I said softly, leaning in. "I already called the anonymous compliance hotline this afternoon." I did not make an accusation. I simply asked for clarification on the policy regarding spousal entertainment expenses. They were very interested in the hypothetical scenario. Grant stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He knew what that meant. In the medical device industry, a compliance investigation was not just an annoyance. It was a career execution. He looked around the room, searching for an ally. He looked at Derek. He looked at Tessa. But they were not looking at him. Derek was studying his cuticles. Tessa was staring at her wine glass. The phones that had been raised to record my humiliation were now resting face down on the table. They realized that the video they were shooting was no longer a comedy skit. It was evidence in a federal wire fraud investigation. "Here is how this ends," I said, pushing the envelope toward him. "You are going to leave my house tonight. You will take only your personal clothing. You will agree to a full forensic audit of our finances, and you will return every cent of the $18,700 you stole using my identity. And if I don't," Grant whispered, his voice trembling. "Then the discovery phase becomes public record," I said. And your company will receive a subpoena for every receipt you have submitted in the last 5 years. The room was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Grant looked at the envelope and his hands began to shake uncontrollably. He was not looking at a wife he could manipulate anymore. He was looking at a wall he could not climb. The play was over, and for the first time in his life, he realized he was not the director. I walked out of the house, and the cool night air felt like freedom. I heard the heavy footsteps of Grant behind me. He scrambled onto the porch, desperate to reclaim the scene he had lost inside. He grabbed my arm, but I pulled away so sharply he stumbled back against the railing. "You see?" Grant shouted, his voice cracking. "You are cold. You are ice cold. Harper. That is why we have no intimacy, because you are incapable of love." It was his old weapon. He was trying to cast me as the villain one last time, hoping the neighbors might hear. But the weapon did not cut me anymore. "You did not want intimacy, Grant," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "You wanted control, and I just took it back." I turned and walked to my car, leaving him standing in the shadow of the house he had turned into a courtroom. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the machinery of my defense was fully operational. Miranda filed the petition. The litigation hold landed on the desk of Blue Canyon's legal team and simultaneously at Grant's company. We demanded everything. We asked for 5 years of expense reports and reimbursements and banking records. I met the locksmith at the townhouse at 10 o'clock. As he drilled out the old tumblers, I called the utility companies. I removed Grant's name from the electric bill and the internet. I separated our lives with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. I forwarded all my mail to a secure box. When Grant tried to call me 5 times in a row, my phone did not even ring. It silently diverted every attempt to Miranda's voicemail. Then came the collapse. Because we had flagged the specific credit card fraud and linked it to his expense reports, the compliance department at his medical device firm did not wait for a subpoena. They opened an internal investigation immediately. I heard from Brielle, who was frantic to switch sides, that Grant had walked into his office on Tuesday to find his security badge deactivated. He was escorted out of the building by security and placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the audit. The group chat disintegrated. Nolan and Derek tried to scrub their social media, deleting the videos and the stories where they had mocked me. They thought if they deleted the files, the evidence would disappear. They did not understand that I had already archived every pixel. When their wives tried to reach out with apologies, I simply forwarded the screenshots to their personal emails as a reminder that the internet never forgets. Grant tried to negotiate. He sent emails begging for a meeting, promising to pay back the $18,700 if I just dropped the fraud claim. Miranda intercepted every message. Her response was a single formal letter stating that all settlement offers must be in writing and accompanied by a sworn financial affidavit listing every asset and debt. He had no cards left to play. In the eyes of the court, he was not a victim of a cold wife. He was a man with a documented pattern of financial manipulation and spousal identity theft. The judge did not see a situation. He saw a crime. The townhouse remained in the trust secure and untouchable. The debt for his parallel life was assigned solely to him. I sat in the living room of my quiet home. The air was still. There was no laughter and no performance. I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder labeled Documentation. It contained months of pain and calculation and silence. I right-clicked on the folder. I selected Rename. I typed in one word, Closed. I did not scream. I did not burn his clothes on the lawn. I simply balanced the ledger. I took back my life using the very tools he thought I was too stupid to understand. And as I closed the laptop, I realized the sweetest sound in the world was not an apology. It was the silence of people who were finally too afraid to laugh. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Harper's Revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories and hit the like button. And if you want to help this story reach even more people, please hit that hype button to support us.